All right. Today's gospel reading is from Luke chapter 23, verses 1 through 38, and also 46 through 56. As always, I'll be doing the explanation according to the Blessed Theophylact, who is an archbishop from the Oak Ridge region of Bulgaria from the 11th century. 1 through 5. And the whole multitude of them arose and led him unto Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, We found this fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to give tribute to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ, a king. And Pilate asked him, saying, Thou art the king of the Jews? And he answered him and said, Thou saith it. Then said Pilate to the chief priests and to the people, I find no fault in this man. And they were the more vehement, saying, He stirreth up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, beginning from Galilee to this place. Explanation here. Clearly, these men are enemies of the truth. How could Jesus have forbidden the people to give tribute when, on the contrary, he put them under strict obligation to pay the tribute, saying, Render unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's? How was he stirring up the people? By making an attempt on a throne? But this is altogether impossible. When the multitude wanted to make him a king, Jesus perceived it and departed. Hence, even Pilate understood this to be a false accusation and declared, I find no fault in this man. It seems to me that even when he asks the question of Christ, Thou art the King of the Jews, he is mocking and ridiculing this accusation. It is as if he were saying, You, penniless, lowborn, naked, and all alone, you are accused of making an attempt against the throne. He is ridiculing, as we have said, those who have fabricated this charge against Jesus, because the commission of such an act requires considerable money and assistance. These accusers had no support for their slander except their own shrill voices, and so they cried out against God the Word. He stirreth up the people, they say, meaning he is fomenting an insurrection, and not just in one place only. He started in Galilee, and after passing through Judea, has reached even here. It is not by accident, it seems to me, that they mentioned Galilee. They wished to frighten Pilate and the Galileans, such as Judas of Galilee, were well-known instigators of rebellion and revolt. It is likely that they wanted to remind Pilate of this. It is as if they were saying, Governor, consider well Judas the Galilean, who caused such a trouble for the Romans when he led a large faction of the people in revolt. This man is like him, and you ought to do away with him. Verses 6 through 27. When Pilate heard of Galilee, he asked whether the man were a Galilean. As soon as he knew that he belonged unto Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who himself was also at Jerusalem at that time. And when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad, for he had long desired to see him, because he had heard many things of him, and he hoped to see some miracle done by him. Then he questioned him with many words, but he answered him nothing. And the chief priests and scribes stood and vehemently accused him. And Herod with his men of war set him at naught, and mocked him, and arrayed him in a gorgeous robe, and sent him again to Pilate. And the same day Pilate and Herod were made friends with one another, for before they were at an enmity between themselves. And Pilate, when he had called together the chief priests and the rulers and the people, said unto them, Ye have brought this man unto me, as one that perverteth the people. And behold, I, having examined him before you, have found no fault in this man touching those things whereof ye accuse him. Nor yet Herod, for I sent you unto him, and lo, nothing worthy of death has been done by him. I will therefore chastise him and release him, for of necessity he must release one unto them at the feast. And they cried out all together, saying, Away with this man, and release unto us Barabbas, who for a certain sedition made in the city, and for murder was cast into prison. Pilate, therefore, desiring to release Jesus, spake again to them. But they cried, saying, Crucify him, crucify him. And he said unto them the third time, Why, what evil hath he done? I have found no cause of death in him. I will therefore chastise him and let him go. And they pressed urgently with loud voices, demanding that he be crucified. And the voices of them and of the chief priests prevailed. And Pilate gave sentence that it should be as they had demanded. And he released unto them him that for the sedition and murder was cast into prison, whom they had demanded, but he delivered Jesus to their will. And as they led him away, they laid upon hold upon one Simon, a Cyrenian, coming out of the country, and on him they laid the cross, that he might bear it after Jesus. And there followed him a great company of people and of women, who also bewailed and lamented him. In the explanation here, Pilate sent the Lord to Herod, following the Roman law which required that every man be judged by the ruler of the province in which he lived. This is why Pilate sent Jesus, a Galilean, to the ruler of Galilee. Herod was glad for this, not for the because he intended to gain something beneficial for his soul from the sight of Jesus. Instead, he entertained a foolish desire to see this strange man and to hear what he had to say. For Herod suffered from a passion for novelty. He had heard much about Jesus and supposed him to be a clever conjurer. Do not many of us suffer the same passion for novelty today? Thus, Herod desired to see for himself some miracle done by Jesus, not in order to believe, but only to feast his eyes, just as we watch tricksters in theaters swallow illusionary serpents and swords, and we are delighted and amazed. Herod thought that Jesus was little more than one of these performers. Herod questioned him with many words, but insincerely and with no serious intent, mocking him all the while. Therefore, Jesus answered him nothing. For he who made all things by his word knew when to answer. To which David testified when he said, "He shall order his words with judgment." In Psalm 111:5, the Septuagint Greek word oikomiese, Greek word, here translated shall order, is the same word used by the fathers to describe the divine economy, God's providential activity in the world for man's sake. What ought the Lord to have answered to this man who was not asking in order to learn? Why should he cast the pearls before the swine? It is, in fact, as we have said above, an act of compassion to remain silent with such men as these. For the word which is spoken and brings no benefit becomes the cause of greater condemnation for those who do not listen. But to Pilate, whose disposition was better than Herod's, the Lord did give an answer, but not a clear one. When Pilate asked, "Thou art the king of the Jews," what did the Lord reply? "Thou sayest it." This has a double meaning. It can mean, indeed I am, and you have said what is true. Note that in the Greek, the form of this question is identical to the form of a statement, which with only the interrogative inflection of the voice, indicated in writing by a question mark to make the distinction. It can also mean, I do not say so, you do. You have the authority, and you speak. But to Herod he answered nothing, for Herod was nothing but a mocker. For as Isaiah says regarding the evil seed, the lawless sons, meaning these Jews, the exactors strip you, and the mockers rule over you. See Isaiah 1:4 and also 3:12. But note that the text of 3:12 used by Blessed Theophylact is not the same as that followed by Lancelot Brenton in his translation. That Herod had just such a mocking and ridiculing intent when he desired to see Jesus and watch him to do a miracle, and that he questioned him with the same disposition, is made clear at the end, when Herod set him at naught and mocked him, and then dismissed him. And it was not Herod alone, but his soldiers with him, who went beyond the limits of insult and arrayed him in a gorgeous robe and sent him again to Pilate. But see, O reader, how everything Herod does ensnares the devil in his own devices. For when Herod performs these mockeries and insults against Christ, the truth is all the more clearly revealed. By ridiculing him in this manner, they give irrefutable testimony that the Lord was not a leader of rebellion and sedition. Had he been, they would not have toyed with him while so great a danger hung over them, namely an uprising of the entire explosive nation of the Jews. The evangelist says, and Pilate and Herod became friends. When Pilate sent Jesus to Herod in deference to Herod's jurisdiction, it marked the beginning of a friendship between the two, because Pilate did not usurp Herod's privileges. See how the devil brings together disparate elements for the sole purpose of preparing Christ's death, forging a single conspiracy and making warring factions friends. Are we not then ashamed that the devil brings peace between enemies in order to kill Christ, while we, for the sake of our salvation, do not even preserve love towards our own friends. When Jesus was sent back to Pilate, consider how the truth shone forth. Ye have brought this man unto me, says Pilate, as one that perverteth the people. And I have found nothing worthy of death in him, nor has Herod. Do you see? Surely the testimony of two men is true, especially when one is the governor and the other is the king. Pilate is saying, neither I nor King Herod have found any fault in him. What will the Jews say to this? The judges themselves testify that the man is guiltless, and you, the accusers, have brought forward no evidence. Who is to be believed? You, the accusers, or the judges? How truth conquers. Jesus is silent, and his enemies bear witness on his behalf. The Jews shout and make a great noise, but there is no one to prove their accusations. Pilate is soft and unable to stand fast for the truth. He was afraid of slander, afraid that the Jews would accuse him of falsely having set free a man who had risen up against the king. Pilate had not learned to say, of your fear we shall not be afraid. The Lord shall be my fear. As is a quote from Isaiah 8:12-13. Pilate says, I will therefore chastise him, that is, have him whipped with scourges and release him. The Romans were required on the feast to release one prisoner to the Jews. For when the Jews made their treaty of submission to Rome, they had been given permission to live according to their own practices and laws. It had been a Jewish practice inherited from their forefathers to demand from their rulers the release of condemned prisoners, as the people had demanded from Saul the release of Jonathan. If you do not know this story, turn to the first book of Kings and you will find it there. 1 Kings 14:42-46. And they cried out all together, saying, away with this man. What could be worse than this? The world is stood on its head, for God's holy race is crazed for murder, while Pilate, the pagan Gentile, abhors the murder and exhorts them to show mercy. Away with this man, and release unto us Barabbas, who for a certain sedition made in the city, and for murder was cast into prison. 3 times Pilate releases the Lord, and 3 times they shout against Christ, giving triple confirmation of their own bloodthirstiness. They denied the holy and righteous one, as blessed Peter says, and desired a murderer to be granted unto them, as it says in Acts 3:14. They loved that which was similar to themselves. Therefore they joined Barabbas, his faction, and themselves became rebels against Rome, and the cause of tens of thousands of murders and their own destruction. The Lord also foretold these events through the mouth of the prophet Jeremiah. I have forsaken my house, I have left my heritage. I have given mine heritage into the hands of enemies, my inheritance that has become to me as a lion in a forest. She has uttered her voice against me. Therefore I have hated her. Have I hated her? As it says in Jeremiah 12:7-8. And again, through the mouth of the prophet Hosea, woe to them, for they have started aside from me. They are cowards, for they have sinned against me. I redeemed them, but they spoke falsehoods against me. Their princes shall fall upon the edge of the sword by reason of their unbridled tongue. As it says in Hosea 7:13-16. Jesus is led out to be crucified. At first they laid his cross on him, and then he went out of the city carrying it. This is because no one else would have consented to carry it, for even the wood of a cross was considered cursed. Later, when they found a certain man named Simon, a Cyrenian, they laid the cross on him, compelling the man to carry it and forcing it upon him like some odious thing from which everyone else drew back in abhorrence. This reveals a great lesson for us. The cross is the deadening of our passions, for the cross deprives the passions of their energy and activity, just as a crucified man is nailed down and made immobile. Therefore, a teacher who follows Christ must first take up his own cross and nail down his flesh with the fear of God. From the prayer of St. Basil the Great at the end of the 6th hour, in which he also applies to our individual moral struggle the Lord's triumph on the cross over the devil, nail down our flesh with the fear of God, and incline not our hearts unto the words or thoughts of evil, but pierce our souls with longing for thee, and shine with passionlessness. Only then can he place the cross upon others who are obedient to him. For the name Simon means obedience. Here also are fulfilled the words of Isaiah, whose government is upon his shoulder, as it says in Isaiah 9:6. For the Lord's government, that is, his rule and kingship, is indeed the cross. As Paul says, he humbled himself and became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. Wherefore God also hath highly exalted him. This is Philippians 2:8-9. Therefore, because the cross became Jesus' glory and exaltation, it is fitting that it should be called his government, that is, the symbol of his governing rank and power, just as the members of the imperial senate have their tokens of rank and dignity, some wearing sashes and others mantles. So too the Lord has the cross as the symbol of his kingship. And if you consider well, you will find that Jesus does not rule over us in any other manner, except by suffering and hardship. Consequently, those who feast and live in luxury are enemies of the cross. The one who is able to be obedient to Christ and to take up his cross in the labor for virtue, coming in from the country, he leaves behind this world and departs from the fields of worldly endeavor and all the works of this world, and he goes toward the heavenly Jerusalem, where there is freedom. The great company of people and of women which followed Christ foreshadowed the great number of Jews and the many women who, after the cross, for this is what is meant by follow, would believe in him. Read the book of Acts, and you will find tens of thousands of those who believed. Do not the wailing and the lamenting of the women who followed Jesus also convey a moral sense for our benefit? These women signify our weak souls when we repent, for when the soul receives contrition of heart through repentance, and mourns and laments its sins, then indeed it follows Jesus, who was afflicted and crucified for our salvation. Verses 28-31. But Jesus turning unto them said, Daughters of Jerusalem, weep not for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming, in which they shall say, Blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bare, and the paps which never gave suck. Then shall they begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. For if they do these things in a green tree, what shall be done in the dry? And the explanation here, the women, to whom tears come easily by nature, are weeping for the Lord as if something terrible had befallen him, bewailing the wrong done to him and showing their own compassion. But he does not accept their lament, and instead it rebukes them, for he suffered willingly. Lamentation is not appropriate for him who suffers willingly for the salvation of all human nature. Instead, praise and acclamations are his due, for by means of the cross death was destroyed and Hades was taken captive. Laments bring comfort not to those who suffer willingly, but to those who suffer against their will. But when the Lord speaks to the women who are bewailing him, is it in fact a rebuke? No. He is exhorting them to consider the catastrophes that are coming and to mourn for the people who will suffer then. For at that time, women will cook with their own children for food without a tear of remorse, and the belly which had carried the child will wretchedly welcome back the thing which it had borne. If the Romans have done these things to me, the green tree, ever flourishing and ever living, on account of my divinity, laden with the fruits of my teachings, which nourish all men, what will the Romans not do to you, the Jewish people, the dry tree, barren of all life, creating righteousness and bearing no fruit? Had there been any amount of living sap of goodness within you, you might have been found deserving of a little bit of mercy. But now you will be like dry wood that is cast into the furnace and destroyed. In verses 32-38, and there were also two others, malefactors, led with him to be put to death. And when they were come to the place which is called the skull, there they crucified him, and the malefactors, one on the right and one on the other on the left. Then said Jesus, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they parted his raiment and cast lots. And the people stood beholding, and the rulers also with them derided him, saying, He saved others, let him save himself, if he be Christ, the chosen of God. And the soldiers also mocked him, coming to him and offering him vinegar, and saying, If thou be the king of the Jews, save thyself. And a superscription was also written over him in letters of Greek and Latin and Hebrew, This is the King of the Jews. The explanation here, And the devil wanted to cast the Lord into evil repute, and so he caused two thieves to be crucified with him. But see how the devil was deprived of one of these thieves, and how this became the cause of yet greater glory for the Lord. Of the three crosses, the two upon which the thieves were executed have always been a matter of complete indifference. But the whole world clings to the cross upon which the Lord was hung. What could make it more clear that the Lord was not a transgressor, as were the thieves, but instead the fountainhead of all righteousness? They led him to the place of the skull, in Hebrew Golgotha, in Latin Calvaria, or its English equivalent Calvary, where it is said that Adam, our forefather, was buried, so that at the place where there had been a fall into death because of a tree, there might be an arising by means of another tree. Jesus shows us the extreme meekness when he prays, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And indeed, this sin would have been forgiven them if they had not afterwards persisted of their unbelief. They parted his raiment. For what reason? Because perhaps because the soldiers had need of it, and there were many of them. But it would be closer to the truth to say that they did this as an insult. For what did they see of value in his clothing? They were in fact mocking and laughing at him. Since the rulers were also mocking him, what could be expected of the common crowd? He saved others, let him save himself, if he be Christ, the chosen of God. It was the devil saying this through their mouths. Here the devil says to Jesus the same thing that he said to him when he tempted him on the pinnacle of the temple in Matthew 4:5-6. Begrudging any good that he now feared might come through the cross, the devil wanted to prevent it by any means possible. The soldiers offered him vinegar as if they were serving a drink to a king. And there is yet another device of the devil that turns back on himself. For the devil had caused to be displayed in the letters of three languages Jesus' supposed crime of insurrection, so that every passerby would know that he had been hung on the cross because he had made himself a king. Yet, what was intended by the devil as an accusation became instead a triumphant symbol of that the most powerful of nations, the Romans, and the most wise, the Greeks, and the most God-fearing, the Hebrews, would all be placed under the kingship of Jesus and would acclaim him. The devil, although wise in evil doing, did not understand. We have spoken of these things at greater length and more profoundly in the explanation of the gospel according to John. In verses 44-49, and it was about the 6th hour, and there was darkness all over the earth until the 9th hour. And the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was rent in the midst. And when Jesus had cried with a loud voice, he said, Father, into thy hands I commit my spirit. And having said this, he breathed his last breath. Now when the centurion saw what was done, he glorified God, saying, Truly this was a righteous man. And all the people that came together to that sight, beholding the things which were done, smote their breasts and returned. And all his acquaintance and the women that followed him from Galilee stood afar off, beholding these things. The explanation here: the Jews once had asked to see a sign from heaven, and behold, now a sign, this strange darkness, and the veil of the temple is rent. The Lord is showing through this that the Holy of Holies will no longer be inaccessible, but will be given over to the Romans for profanation. The Lord also shows that the veil which had once separated us from the holy things in heaven, the veil of enmity and sin, is now torn asunder. For this is the great barrier which separates us from that place. And the Lord also shows that he was not crucified because he was too weak to resist it. He who did such things as these had the power to shatter and destroy his crucifiers. When he had cried out with a loud voice, he gave up his breath, for he had the power to lay down his life and to take it back again. It was the Lord's voice itself, together with the other miracles, which caused the centurion to believe. For the Lord did not die as an ordinary man, but as the Master. He named death a committal, that is, a deposit for safekeeping, because he intended to receive back his life. His last words, the first, such ever spoken by a man completely free of any claim by the devil, made our souls worthy of freedom. For in Christ our souls have likely been committed to the Father and are no longer held by the devil. Before the death of Christ, the devil had a clear right to our souls. But from the moment that the Son committed his spirit, not to Hades, but into the hands of the Father, our souls were freed from Hades. The very thing which the Lord had said, and I, if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men unto me, as it says in John 12:32, is now seen to have been accomplished. For when the Lord was lifted up on the cross, he drew both the thief and the centurion to himself. Certain of the Jews who smote their breasts, but thereby faulted their crucifiers, and clearly justified Jesus. His disciples fled, and the women, that portion of mankind who first received the condemnation and curse for sin, remained and beheld all these things. They were the first to enjoy the justification and the blessing of the cross, just as they were the first to enjoy the resurrection. Marvel with me, O reader, at the hard-heartedness of the Jews. Those who said, "Let him now come down from the cross, and we will believe." When they see even greater things than this, they still do not believe. Was coming down from the cross the equal of darkening the sun, breaking the rocks, causing a fearful earthquake, raising the dead, tearing the veil, and altering the elements of creation? Therefore, let no one wonder why the Lord did not come down from the cross to make them believe, but let him accept these things without idle curiosity, realizing that even if he had come down, they would still not have believed. Moreover, had he come down from the cross, it would have eliminated any hope of salvation through the cross. For the cross, above all else, is the glory of Christ. By working greater miracles than coming down from the cross, none of which brought the Jews to belief, he achieved two things at once. He endured and accepted the cross until the end, making it the great trophy of victory. A tropaeon, in the ancient world was a monument of victory in war. It consisted of the weapons of the defeated enemy, which were hung on a tree or a post. And he showed these unbelieving Jews to be complete ingrates, and with no trace of good in them, who were fused to their unbelief. And verses 50 through 56. And behold, there was a man named Joseph, a counselor, and he was a good man and righteous. The same had not consented to their counsel. Indeed, he was of Arimathea, a city of the Jews, who also himself waited for the kingdom of God. This man went unto Pilate and begged the body of Jesus. And he took it down and wrapped it in linen and laid it in a tomb that was hewn in stone, wherein never a man before was laid. And that day was the preparation, and the Sabbath drew on. And the women also who came with him from Galilee followed after, and beheld the tomb and how his body was laid. And they returned and prepared spices and myrrh and oils, and rested the Sabbath day according to the commandment. And the explanation here: although Joseph until now had hidden his faith, now he does a praiseworthy thing. Although he was a member of the council and a rich man, he dares to ask for the body of a man who had been crucified for rebellion and sedition, giving no thought to any danger to himself. Although wealth often gives rise to cowardice, Joseph begs for the body and gives it honorable burial in a tomb that was hewn in stone, wherein never a man before was laid, so that the slanderers could not say that it was a different body that rose. The women had faith in the Lord, but did not yet have faith that befitted the Lord. It was too small and weak, for they thought that he was merely a man, subject to corruption, and so they prepared myrrh oils and spices for his dead body, in accordance with the practice which prevailed among the Jews, and they rested the Sabbath day according to the commandment of the law.